So we got three kind of topics left, more or less, right? We have non-structural best management practices and structural best management practices. And the idea behind low impact development or green infrastructure is they can be put into two categories. We've got the non-structural, the planning, the organizing, the thought process, the codes. And you got the structural, so the harder kind, I don't want to say harder engineering, but the engineering side of things, or the actual physical implementation side of things. And so we're going to cover both of those in kind of an overview form. And then the last section is the economics, why a lot of people have questions about this is the economics. We'll do the economics and some of the maintenance issues associated with it. As we've talked about before, one of the biggest problems with the structural best management practices is that they're frequently not installed correctly, and they're definitely not maintained correctly, which then gives that best management practices a bad name, right? And instead of it being a BMP best management practice, it becomes a BMP bad management practice. So you have to be very careful that you don't have a bad management practices inadvertently. So it's one of the reasons people like gray infrastructure, right, is you have a tendency to put it in the ground and never think about it. It's underground, you don't have to worry about it. It's a pipe, it's concrete, don't ever have to worry about it. Well, that's a fallacy as well, okay? Even traditional gray infrastructure has operation and maintenance expenses, it's just that the public doesn't see them, okay? And so, but the low impact development, the public sees them, right? And that, so it's just about, or part of it has to do then with how do you change your O&M operations and maintenance to adjust for the changing perceptions. So that will be covered as part of this session and the last session as well. So site planning. Okay. So one of the things, make sure there we go. Stop. Okay. Forget about what you've done in the past. That's the big part. It's clear your mind. Forget about what you've done and think about a better way. Right. We are frequently encumbered by historical precedent. We're frequently encumbered by codes and ordinances, and we're definitely encumbered by existing master plans, right? There's some, for whatever reason, there's some thought process that a master plan, oh, we have a master plan, we got to do what's exactly in this master plan. They should be evolving. They should be, as we get smarter, the master plan should get smarter as well. All right. What else do I want to say about that before moving on? Oh, yeah, just again, the level of content, as Ralph, beforehand, we talked about, there's some engineers, some planners, some architects, landscape. All of this is going to be at kind of a baseline level. That's kind of the goal of this. It's not on a detailed planning level. It's not an engineering level. A lot of these slides do come from Amy Magnus, SEMCOG, the Southern Michigan LID manual. So here's one thing. Let me ask you this. Here's a great question for everybody in the room. And it's okay. I know the answer, so don't be ashamed, because I already know the answer. How many of you already have a copy of the Michigan LID manual? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's 6. And so 6 out of 30. Okay, that's actually higher than most of the time I do this workshop. Okay, it's unfortunate that how little this manual has been downloaded and utilized. And here's what I do: a lot of national workshops as well. And here's what I think is fascinating. The Michigan LID manual gave our state more credence and credibility on a national stage than it did on a local stage. I find that kind of ironic. I go to these conferences like, oh man, you guys are so far ahead. Us? Yeah, that manual you got. I mean, I wish we had one of those manuals. And I'm like, you realize that this isn't code, right? I mean, no one has to do this. But this manual, I think it's used more outside of the state of Michigan than inside the state of Michigan. So if there's any takeaway from this, this is a free PDF. It's very voluminous, as Ralph said. But you can download each chapter individually. Personally, I love the hard copy. I didn't pull it out. I actually use this as a textbook in my engineering classes. When we wrote this manual, and there's a whole bunch of us that participated. When we wrote this manual, the thought process was sections for everybody. What is a section the government officials can use? What's a section the engineers can use? Etc. So my engineering graduate students have this as a textbook. Okay? Planning graduate students at the University of Michigan have this as a textbook. Okay, so it is very broad. So, what are we going to try to accomplish? Well, how do you incorporate LID into a master plan? Okay, how do you incorporate it into the site development process? So, watershed processes down to site development processes. Non-structural BMPs are what we're going to be focusing on, and then some example site plans. So one of the things about a master plan is it really guides the community and frequently sets a legal foundation. I'm not a planner, as we've already determined, but this guide is in place frequently for legal precedent for the community. A lot of things that are development is that in your master plan? I know for the DNR, they have a 5-year rec plan, and if it's not in your 5-year rec plan, you can't get state money for it. So a lot of state grants, 319 grants, you can only get 319 grants, which is a pot of money for stormwater management, if it's in your master plan. So these master plans are very, very important. One of the things you should look at is, okay, stormwater management. The question becomes, well, why? Okay? Try to link it to health, safety, and welfare. Right? As an engineer, my number one canon is to protect the health, safety, and welfare of the public. It's not to protect the environment. Okay? But they go hand in hand. And so part of the master plan is to acknowledge the importance of stormwater runoff for Torch Lake, for flooding, for health and safety. Trust me, we know a little bit about the health effects of stormwater runoff. Spent a little bit of time in the Western Lake Erie Basin. All right. Last year, when almost 1 million people didn't have drinking water because of runoff. All right. If you don't know what I'm talking about, Google Toledo or algae bloom Lake Erie, and you'll find out. Okay. All right. So what do you got to do? So you want to try to protect your land's ability to absorb, clean, and storm stormwater. That goes back to what I'm not going to repeat what Ralph said. You want to try to minimize impervious surfaces, implement best management practices, and you have to have education programs. One of the things that I struggle with a lot, and a lot of people struggle with, including I'm sure the Watershed Council, how you get this stuff at a level that the K-12 will understand it. Because if you get the students to understand it, you got a shot at getting your elected officials to understand it. Another jab at Ralph, who's an elected official. Right? But get it at a level that the people can understand it and implement it. Okay, that's really important. And again, I already mentioned that. So one of the things you might see, and there's a whole bunch of these in the manual, I'm not going to go through a lot of them, but it's the idea of having a goal and a policy statement. So the goal could be something like minimize impervious surface. That's our goal. We want to have less imperviousness around. Okay? So the policy statement should be encourage the use of cluster development, vegetated swales, disconnecting downspouts, and other practices that reduce these things. So you have a goal, you have a policy statement, and then from there you can have codes, right? A code statement that says thou shalt, or this is how you're going to do this. I know one of the things that happened in the city of Southfield is the idea of this carrot and stick approach. One of the things they did is they said, well, we want to encourage this, but we're not ready to put in ordinances that force this. So what they did is they said their policy statement, or the way they did it was, anybody who is incorporating LID techniques gets to the front of the review process. Okay? And so what happened was you had developers coming in with plans for review that have to be approved before they can start construction. And they would show up and they kept getting bumped down the rung. So a new developer would come in using LID and they would go straight to the top of the zoning review process. And so after month, they kept getting bumped. And they finally said, what the heck? And the Southfield's like, hey, you don't have to do this stuff, but if you want us to ever review it, put it in there. You know? And I'm being a bit tongue-in-cheek, but they kept getting bumped to the fact that they weren't getting reviewed. So that was just whether you want to call that a carrot or a stick is questionable. But no one said you had to do it, but if you did it, you went to the top. Okay. So another example. Be careful where I'm walking, apparently. So here's another example. I had better luck at that. Use best management practices. Okay, the policy statements could say where site conditions allow, use infiltration practices to reduce the amount of runoff. Not all site conditions allow this. Let's acknowledge that different best management practices work in different places. I'm going to spend the afternoon talking about structural BMPs, but I'm going to mention it now just in case, because a lot of times what will happen is I'll mention this stuff, and people will come up to me and say, well, I can't do all that. And my answer to that is, I don't do all of that, right? A lot of it has to do with what works for your site, your location, your situation. So how do you incorporate LID into the site process? Well, this is a 9-step site design process. Right? Step 1 and 2 are going to happen no matter what. Right? So looking at the codes, which is the municipal county requirements, kind of when you start at 4, this is when you start really getting into the LID part. And then Ralph was talking about 8. He was spending a lot of time talking about 7 and 8. All right. Here is, I actually look at it as then it's iterative. It should be very, very iterative. Because what ends up happening in traditional stormwater design is that you have a land development, you have an overview, what we might call a 30% design. For those of you who really work in this business, right, you got a 30% design review, a 60% design review, and then a 100% design review. The problem is that you go through these initial site development concepts, and then, okay, let's make the stormwater work. Okay? This puts that on end. You take the water into consideration first. You don't figure it out later. Okay? So property, and obviously in the background you're going to see Michigan examples of LID and other places, just kind of in the background. You're going to see more of that this afternoon. Yeah, I'm gonna just, this is generic. This is more of the, this one I'll leave in there. So inventory and evaluate the site, right? Where on your site do you have wetlands, your wetland inventory? How can those wetlands be part of either passive recreation through trails, maybe through educational signage? Okay, that jumped a little too fast. Okay. Figure out the natural resource systems. I've had, so you know, when you do the 303 wetlands, right? There's a lot of wetlands that aren't in there yet because they haven't been mapped. And so actually mapping those, figuring out those where they exist, but looking at the site topography, looking at the soils, the groundwater level, the vegetation, you know, it's really spending more time looking at your site and how everything interacts. There was, I worked on a project in, keep catching my eye and a half. I thought it was glass, it's actually an ice cube. But either way, it was distracting me. I worked on a project down in Cincinnati for a school, and this was US EPA was heavily involved in this project, so I should minimize. My role was pretty darn small, but they had a lot of tight soils, right? But in a little bit of exploration, they found a good layer of soil. You guys are blessed here with soils. They found a good layer of soil, and they were able then to put in basically infiltration basins and rain gardens that tapped into that more permeable layer. But it caused them to kind of rethink about how water moved around the site completely. And then now they just get zero discharge for a 10-year storm. They got a 10-year storm, zero discharge, because they looked at the soils and the topography. So that's not what we're talking about. When you're looking at master plans, watershed master plans, when you're looking at site development plans, topography and soils are going to play a huge role in that. And those are the things that are undervalued or underappreciated in the current process. We can't control the rain. I like to think I can, but I can't. I can't control the rain. You already have in mind what you want to put on that site when I'm speaking generically about a developer. What we can look at is topography and soils, and that's the iterative process. Okay. So do a watershed scale evaluation. Does the site drain to special water rights? Is it a trout stream? Okay. Is it a protected water body? Is it a groundwater supply protection zone for drinking water? Is there any special fisheries issues that I need to be concerned with? Okay. Is the site linked to special habitat? Are there known downstream flooding problems? This last one, so Ralph talked about this. I'm going to expand it a little bit. In that, one of the biggest problems with stormwater ordinances codes, right, is he already mentioned, maybe I should quiz you guys, see how much you're paying attention to. They're mostly based on peak discharge. Okay, not volume. Okay. Well, as we hopefully can keep reinforcing to you, volume is key. Volume is critical. Well, here's the other problem with that: is when you look at each development separately, and I'm releasing more volume, and you're releasing more volume, and you're releasing more volume. Well, the person downstream, it's not just your site; it's all three of those sites. And so the cumulative effect in this case is actually greater than the sum of the parts. I know it sounds a little weird, but when you look at site development by development by development, even if all of you have some BMPs in place or some stormwater control, downstream it's even greater just because of the way the pieces add together. Okay? And so what the biggest way, what I always tell my students is whatever you do, just live at the headwaters of the watershed. All right. Find out. Talk to your local hydrologist. Find out where they live. Buy a house next door. Okay? Stay away from the low part of the watershed. Okay. Master plan. Is there additional development? And this goes both ways. And I'll explain. So one of the problems I recently got. It's funny how this can go both ways. I recently got brought in as an expert witness because of a very large development went in. They followed all the stormwater ordinances. And in fact, they did above and beyond what they had to do. They were very proud of themselves. They actually cut off too much water to the receiving waters downstream. It's watershed wide. And in addition to that, what their release rate was, they were releasing it to a county drain. So effectively what they did, I'm going to paint a generic picture, but what they did is they had this bigger watershed. The receiving waters were here. Their development was right in the middle. They caught all the water from upstream and then they put it into a county drain over here. They starved the lower area. They dried up wetlands. They dried up farmers' wells. And so this was a development that not only followed the ordinances but went above and beyond, but they didn't look at the watershed as a whole. And so they were actually getting nailed for dealing with water too much. Okay? So you gotta look at how does this fit into the bigger picture? Site-specific evaluation. What are the important hydrologic functions? We already talked about that. Important, right? Soil, I already talked about. Where's the water table? How does that vary across your site, depending on how big your site is? You say, is there bedrock involved? Where would that bedrock be? Okay. And then how does size and shape affect stormwater management? Okay, if I have an acre, 5 acres, 10 acres, 100 acres, what I do is different. Okay, a quarter-acre site across the street is very different than a 100-acre land development going in, somewhere outside of the rural part of Petoskey. Okay, with government requirements, we've already talked about that. Master plans are a big part of what you need to do for grants from the state. Zoning ordinances can be a real pain in the rear, but looking at what does the zoning say, what does it require, all right, and then what kind of ordinances. And so from a local government point of view, this is what we talked about. We've hit on this, and I'm going to continue to hit on it, that sometimes these things are written such that it not only won't allow it, it'll stop LID. So you got to kind of look at rewriting your ordinances, and that's going to come up a little bit later as well. What are the county, state, and federal requirements? One of the things that we, with Michigan being a pretty intense home rule state, a lot of this falls at the county level. Ralph already mentioned from Clare down, there's some different regulations than here up. But even from Clare down, every county is different. So Southeast Michigan, Washtenaw County, Wayne County, very progressive. I step 1 foot over into St. Clair County and I can do whatever I want. They have almost no stormwater control beyond what the US EPA requires. So when you look at, I don't know how much variability. Do you have a lot of variability by county across your region or not? Or is it all pretty similar? You do.
By township.
So what?
By township.
By township. Yeah. See, down by us, it's not so much by township. It's county is the big driver. But but it is to look at. Okay, what do they say? So what are some of the non-structural BMPs that we can get to or talk about? Okay. Sensitive areas, cluster development, minimizing imperviousness. All right. So step 5. So this is a lot of times you do some site visits, you have some pre-submission meetings, talk about green infrastructure, talk about what it looks like, effectively communicate the perceptions of the project. One of the things that I'm doing a lot of now, and you're going to get some examples of this in a little bit, is I use a lot of landscape architectures and a lot of visualizations to get people to understand what it can or should look like, but also to make sure it's a realistic representation. Right? There's been some great work done at Kid Creek over in Traverse City. One of our developers, our local developers in Detroit, they wanted a daylight, what we call the bloody run, and it is a complete waste of $1 billion. And they're setting up an expectation that just isn't there. Bloody Run was put into a pipe and doesn't exist anymore. And so I know I'm getting a little off topic here, but they're putting out all these pictures of people like kayaking, right? And this is not going to happen in urban Detroit. They couldn't get enough money to put a trout stream because it doesn't exist anymore. The point of that is you really need to make sure you're effectively communicating the perception of the project. Because some of it, we had a project killed in the city of Southfield. Bioswales, which we're going to talk about this afternoon. We had bioswales up and down the road. Okay, at a single, and this had gone through 90% design. We were ready to practically break ground, right? And a city council person stepped up and said, our babies are going to drown in those swales. Those swales are going to carry water. Somebody's going to run their buggy off the road and accidentally put a kid in there, and that water's going to sweep them away. Literally, this was done in a public meeting. Those bioswales were removed from the plants. We went right back to curb and gutter. And it was just like, it was a staggering blow to the engineers, to the planners, to everybody who'd spent, hey, look what we're doing for the environment. And it took one baby falling out of the carriage and being swept away to kill it all. And even though it was completely irrational, that's really what happened. And so the whole point of that, though, is to really talk about expectations, perceptions. The perception that person had of swales was giant floodways that carry water at a velocity that's going to kill small children. And that was never going to happen. It was never going to happen. And it didn't matter, the engineer stepped up and said, the water is flowing through, there's only a half feet per second. It didn't matter, right? They had a perception in their head. Structural BMPs are what we're really looking for stormwater requirements. Non-structural BMPs, planning, watershed planning is good, but the structural BMPs is what you're really going to need. Not all BMPs are appropriate for every site, and we're going to talk a lot more about that this afternoon. Okay. Ralph already kind of talked about this, so I'm not going to spend any more time on it. But volume control, peak control, water quality control, you need all of those things. A lot of the ways you get this last point about credit for applying non-structural BMPs in engineering plans or plan review, county, township, whatever. A lot of times what you end up doing is saying, if you do these non-structural BMPs, we'll give you credit on how much water you need to capture and treat. So it's kind of a trade-off. Like, we don't necessarily need you to run all the numerical modeling on these things, but if you do these things, we'll give you some credit for it in terms of your end design. And then you just kind of, it's very, very iterative is what I would say. You just kind of keep looping around. So, what are the 9 non-structural BMPs? Cluster development, protect sensitive areas, minimize impervious surface, minimize disturbance, soil compaction, stormwater disconnect, pathways. We're going to go through all of these, right? And then native landscaping. Native landscaping ends up both in structural and non-structural. And we'll explain that more later. So what is cluster development? Increase open spaces, reduces overall infrastructure, and it works really well with protective sensitive areas, which is the next of these BMPs. One of the things with clusters, so this is Baldwin Park. And one of your reactions might be, oh my God, this is what we're trying to prevent. Not necessarily. Okay, not necessarily. This is what's called a cluster development, right? This is very, very tight. Yes, these houses are really close to each other, really narrow roadways. By clustering this development tight, they were able to then protect and preserve other areas. Instead of having 2-acre lawns everywhere, they clustered it around. Note, do you see a detention pond anywhere on this site? Nope. Right? They're actually using swales, detention. They have some pocket areas here. This is their stormwater right here. It's a giant meadow. And I know this is Florida, but the underlying comment here is there's a lot of sand in this area. So they're able to use this giant meadow, and this is a bike trail, by the way, just a bike trail, even though it's got a little curve to it. Oops, sorry. So this is basically a huge infiltration basin, and it's dry most of the time. So people ask me a lot. So I'm actually a licensed professional engineer in 2 states, Florida and Michigan. I do consulting and design work in Florida and Michigan, and people frequently ask me, well, what's the difference between stormwater in Florida and stormwater in Michigan? My answer is the alligators. Water's water, sand, sand. The real difference, I can tell you this: what we call a 100-year storm event, they call Tuesday afternoon. Yeah. That's the other big difference. So this is Stone Creek Ranch, North Carolina. Again, cluster subdivision, right? You can see they've set aside areas. What you can't tell here is these were the natural swales, the natural flow paths that they then set aside and protected. They didn't allow development in these areas. Okay, so this is a cluster subdivision. Okay. Protect sensitive areas. This is great for improving the water quality. We want to try to preserve and protect that high quality habitat. This will add storage volume. You can't necessarily get credit for water you put into an existing wetlands area, but when you look at a watershed-wide master plan, these sensitive areas can give you the storage volume you need. That's their historical function. Okay? And they will reduce the impact of peak storms. Okay? protecting sensitive areas doesn't mean you have to completely let them hands off. Some things will be hands off, some things will be more about passive recreation. You know, putting a trail through it or a boardwalk through it, allowing people to access it. One of the mistakes we make, this is where you get too many lawyers involved. No lawyers are in the room, right? One of the mistakes we make, right, is we have these giant detention basins, and then the first thing we do is put a giant chain link fence around them because they're dangerous, right? Getting multiple uses of our land should be more of a priority, okay? If it's pouring rain, nobody's going to be in that park anyway. So let's have a park also duplicate as a stormwater treatment basin. Okay? Allow those dual uses. Minimize impervious surface. We've kind of hit at this a lot. So this can actually reduce development cost. I'm going to talk about cost at the very, very end. But just to mention it now is that people have to look at the whole cost package. The cost of the pipe, the cost of the labor, the cost of the maintenance. When you look at element by element, frequently these BMPs I'm going to talk about next time are more expensive. When you look at the whole package, that's when you see the savings, and that's the important part. Okay? So if you have less impervious space, you have less development costs, less maintenance costs, there's less plowing, there's less salting, there's less vacuuming, there's all less everything.
What about taking care of all those plants that you planted for your, say they're perennials, and taking care of them every year so they meet the cosmetic needs?
Right.
Isn't that going to cost more?
Well, it's actually, so as an example, right now it actually costs less than mowing does. So if I have to mow, and this has actually been studied and done, one of the reasons Wayne County is actually going to grow zones and native prairies, like I'm going to show in a little bit, it actually brought their maintenance costs down because they were mowing the darn stuff weekly. And now by doing more native plants and more flowering plants, they do have maintenance costs, but it's actually less than the perpetual mowing and watering they had to do to meet that expectation instead. It's just a transfer cost, right? There are maintenance costs associated with LID, absolutely. But the thing is that there's also maintenance costs associated with traditional gray infrastructure. But again, it goes back to, unfortunately, people don't see that. They don't see that there's maintenance costs associated with this as well. A very expensive vacuum truck has to go out there 3 times a year to suck up the catch basins. That is expensive. It's probably cheaper to use summer labor to maintain the beds. So, and that's what a lot of municipalities are finding out.
That's doing public work. Our company does probably 80% public work. That's probably our biggest challenge in implementing LIDs. It's not the maintenance cost per se, but getting the client to understand the offset from the traditional maintenance cost.
It's very difficult to get people to understand that. I've got a few tools coming up in the last session that hopefully will help with that. One of the best things you can do is try to get people on the phone from areas that have had success with it. But even that, you know, is a little tough, right? I said Wayne County's had great success with it. So here's an example. So we tried this in a few places. This was originally going to be a road. They got rid of it. Okay, so they have rear yard alleys. So the original design had rear yard alleys for parking. So that was but this was going to be a road anyway. And they said, let's see what happens. Let's just get rid of the road. And they actually found out that these units sold faster. People wanted to live there instead of being on a road. Okay, so this was kind of a planning. So this is the idea of minimizing pervious surface. They said, let's just eliminate some of the roads and see what happens. And it actually ended up being it was a windfall for them financially, believe it or not, because now there's no pavement. And now there's no pavement, and they actually got a premium for these houses. So. Minimize disturbance area. As Ralph mentioned, one of the biggest problems we have is we clear cut everything, we stockpile the soil, then we screen it and we put it all back. Okay. Spend a little bit more time minimizing your grading, minimizing your soil compaction, thinking about how you're going to stockpile soil, what you do need to stockpile, and how that lays out. Okay. I put this out there because it's a software I like. I know this isn't, when I talk to engineers, I do a lot more of this, but there's a software called SiteOps. And what SiteOps does is you basically give it it's an AutoCAD type tool. You basically give it your parameters. I need this size building, I need this much parking, I need this much road. And then you load in the soils and you load in the topography, and it basically optimizes it for you. And so it can actually help you say, you know what, put the high school here instead of here. because you're going to get more infiltration and move less soil, and that's going to save you money. So there's tools becoming available for people. Now this would be on a bigger site, not kind of like a little infill site, but you get my point. Got to minimize soil compaction. That's one of the. I didn't want to jump into Ralph's too much, but turf grass, very, very short turf grass on C and D soils is practically asphalt. I mean, anybody who waters your lawn, or looks at lawn watering, look at how much water comes off of a watered lawn. That's because you don't get infiltration on that. And so a lot of what we do when we do our development is just packing down that soil and throwing fescue out there. Okay? You really need to rehabilitate your soils, or better yet, protect them. And this, like I said, there's case studies out there now where by locating and utilizing good draining native soils, they cut their costs way down because they don't have the pipes, they don't have the pond, they don't have a lot of these other issues. You got Class A and B soils, you're in great shape. Great shape for this stuff. Large amount of water can go into Class A soil. Sand. Large amount. Disconnect. I know I'm trying to catch up a little bit here. I don't want to beat a dead horse at this point. Treatment chain. One of the things we talk about more and more in engineering is the treatment chain approach. It's not just capturing and treating water one way, it's capturing and treating water multiple ways. Maybe you have a rain barrel that then overflows into a rain garden. Okay, maybe you have native vegetation that then spills into a filtering system that then spills into a wetland. So putting them in chain or in sequence, all of those things will increase your time of concentration, and every step you take that water through, you're going to get more evapotranspiration, more infiltration. So just move that water around the site, and it can be very subtle, but every little bit can make a big difference. And then supplemental use of water for landscaping and things of that nature that we're going to talk about this afternoon. So here's two examples, two very dense examples. So we talk about connection. So hooking up downspouts straight into a storm drain. Jen mentioned they had an illegal hookup where their storm sewer was going straight into a sanitary. Historically, almost all roof leads were basically put right into pipes. Okay, that's called direct connect. And those were either stormwater pipes or combined sewer pipes. I know we don't have a lot of issues with combined sewers up here, but a lot of places this has become illegal, but it still happens all the time. People just put their storm pipe right into their roof lead right into a storm pipe. So here's two examples of retrofits. All right, this pipe right here, this is a pretty dense spot. There's not a lot of room right here. This pipe used to go straight into a storm sewer system and then went straight out to the receiving waters. They just cut it off here, put it through a small gravel area into a rain garden. There's your overflow. So the excess water still goes where it needs to go. And then they're starting to plant vegetation here. So tight spot, big benefit. Okay, so here was even tighter spot. Not enough room in here for a good rain garden, so they put in a planter box. Okay, so the roof water comes in, fills this thing completely up. All right, and then I forgot what kind of sedge they're using here, but they basically used an incredibly wet tolerant sedge type plant for it. Okay, so both of these are tight areas, and both of these can capture and treat the 1 or 2 inches of water they need. That's the idea of disconnecting impervious surface. We'll do more of these this afternoon. Okay. Protect flow pathways. Maximize that natural hydrologic function. Let the watershed act the way the watershed wants to act. Okay? As much as you can, you're trying to mimic Mother Nature. Again, I don't want to repeat everything Ralph said. It also improves habitat.
Never hurts.
So this is an example of protecting a flow pathway. All right, for a school. This here, in a traditional development, was going to be mowed turf grass. There's a nice swale, so all that water was running off the other turf grass into the mowed turf grass and straight on out. So even converting, I don't know, I'm going to say 20% of that lawn, which was the low natural drainage area anyway, with native prairie plants, made a huge difference on protecting the natural pathway, increasing the time and concentration, evapotranspiration, and infiltration. So you don't necessarily have to put the entire lawn in this, but even a small piece, as long as it's the last piece down the way, can make a big difference. Riparian buffer zones, huge deal. Protect those riparian buffer zones. Okay? And they can actually do a nice job of increasing site aesthetics. Again, a lot of this is improving habitat. So one of the things at Lawrence Tech, sometimes when I think of things, I just say them. I'm driving my wife nuts. So Lawrence Tech, we converted 2 acres of turf grass to native prairie plants. A lot of flowering plants as well. We've seen like a 5-fold increase in infiltration. So water that was running out of the site doesn't anymore. We chose those 2 acres, even though they're grow zones or native prairie zones, up against riparian zones. So it was basically adjacent to the Rouge River that flows through there. The ancillary benefit was the number of pollinators we're seeing is crazy. Anybody follows kind of the news, bee colonies, protecting pollinators, protecting the bee colonies, this is something that should be really, really scary. For any place like northern Michigan that's got the kind of agrarian system that we have up here with the apples and the orchards and everything else, we need the pollinators. Right? If those collapse, we're in trouble. By putting in these native prairie plants, I'll go through my grow zone, and there are butterflies and bees and all sorts of pollinators just around there. And so we're providing habitat for them. Right? And the best thing about it is, again, it's education, right? We have videos of me posted online petting bees. They're not interested in me, right? I mean, people are like, oh my God, my kids are gonna get stung. You know, that's not really how it works. I understand, you know, most of the time you get stung if you're trying to whack them or slap them or whatever, right? That they're very interested in these prairie plants. And so I'm literally sitting there petting bees. They have no care that I'm there. And that's that message we're trying to get across, right? Just putting in a riparian buffer zone over there, we need the bees, we need the pollinators, we need the butterflies. Let's convince the people of the worth of that, those ecosystem function services. Okay. So, riparian, my wife's convinced. There are 2 words I use all the time that my wife is convinced I made up. One is riparian. Riparian means river adjacent. Okay. The other one is fluvial geomorphology. I use the word fluvial geomorphology. She's convinced I made that up. And that's basically fluvial, water, geo, earth, morphology moves, right? So, but the riparian buffer is this zone. And what studies have shown that as little as 20 to 30 feet of riparian buffer can make a huge difference in those water quality plots that Ralph showed. The benthics, the smallest part of the food chain.
Can you,
yeah, sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
Well, just to equate that to a lake, most of your concepts will.
Oh, absolutely. So, yeah, for lake, it's lacustrine. So lacustrine, lake adjacent.
Yeah,
but no,
term may be different, but the concept there.
The concept's the exact same. You know, the concept's the exact same. Intercepting. So one of the things we've only hinted at, any of the plant specialists in here can do a much better job than me, but the more and more I learn about this stuff, the more and more I'm amazed at what Mother Nature can do. If you don't overtax her, what she can do to clean and purify the water is amazing. You know, and so I put in porous pavement. And in which we're going to talk about later, inside the porous pavement you get a biofilm that builds up. And that biofilm and those microbes break down and clean up these pollutants. Okay? Same thing happens in rain gardens. You know, the smallest microbes are actually breaking down those pollutants. The plants will uptake those pollutants. So in Detroit, we're actually using pennycress and sunflowers to basically remediate the soils to safe levels. So we're, you know, it's basically natural remediation of the soils. So it's really amazing what this stuff can do. So
go ahead.
I was saying, so the polluted water runoff, by getting it through this buffer, you get the evapotranspiration, you get the infiltration, and the filtration, so that the water that ends up in the river or lake is a lot cleaner than it would have been if it sheet flowed right off, or worse yet, in a pipe.
I just cannot overstate the value of a riparian buffer. You know, Don went on and on about bees and butterflies and all that as one thing. People study these things to death, and there are just multiple benefits. And we found a long time ago, we did a literature search and found that if the riparian buffer decreases, anything less than 100 feet begins to impact the waterway in some way. I mean, there's multiple research on that. So, but like Don said, a minimum of 25 feet starts to have a huge impact. So riparian buffers are huge. Just
especially for protecting the lowest level of the food chain is just massive.
You have, you know, as far as not only having a buffer, but the vegetation that's in that buffer. You know, we require in our ordinance that you have a buffer and that be made up of native, you know, plants and things like that. invariably when we get a site plan, they want to put a flower garden there.
Yeah.
What do you think about?
So I'm going to talk about plants here in a little bit.
Okay.
You know, you really need those deep-rooted plants. I mean, a flower garden isn't going to cut it. I mean, it can be a flowering, deep-rooted native plant. And you really need those deep-rooted plants to get a lot of these benefits.
I was just going to ask you about what we run into up here. Are a lot of folks have second homes here, and they tend to bring like Kentucky bluegrass, you know what I mean, as opposed to, and they want to put a sandy beach in, you know, where there isn't a sandy beach, and they want to cut down trees so that they can see the lake better, you know. So we need strong educational tools for not only the clients, you know, the people who are coming here, but also for the builders, you know, the developers and you know, such.
A lot of that goes back to the education. So our cottage, our second home, is on Spider Lake in the Traverse City area. And that lake has got really good water quality, and if you go around the lake, there's a lot of riparian buffers. You know, people are not, there's a lot of trees, you know, you can't really, there's houses you really can't even see until the leaves fall, etc. So part of that is part of the education has to be, okay, why do you want to be here? Why do you want to be on this lake? What's your goal, right? And when you start talking about water quality and fishing and swimming and that kind of aesthetic, then you can say, all right, well, guess what? What you're doing is counter to that. You know, the grass you're putting in, the fertilizer you're using. You know, we've already talked about the Torch Lake, that you're starting to see the blue-green algae in Torch Lake. If you start tying it to, or, you know, if you,
golden brown, not
sorry. Sorry, not blue-green, gold brown.
Probably a long ways from blue-green.
Okay. So the algae we're starting to say at Torch Lake. So, but that is part of it, right? Is okay. Sometimes it can be the education through homeowners associations, through workshops. Sometimes it's ordinance. Okay, you know, the people that are living here year-round, we're just not going to allow this. You know, we're just going to tell the people who are coming here this is not acceptable, and still try to educate why, that it's not just because you don't like them. Obviously, what we're going for, right, is after a big storm event, you want this level of water, not this level of water. That goes back to what we were talking about earlier for the hydrology, is that doing things on the watershed-wide scale can keep the flow in bank. I'm not saying this isn't a riparian buffer. That's not what I mean by it. I'm talking about the water in the channel. So. Native landscaping, I'm doing the best I can. I'm almost getting us back on time. Right plant, right place. Huge, huge, huge. Right plant, right place. I get called in a lot. It's funny how they call me in, because I do a lot of rain garden workshops, so I get a lot of phone calls about the plants, believe it or not. And I know enough about plants to field some of them. So, well, blue flag iris is not really going to grow there. So, drought tolerant is a lot of times we're looking for is native drought tolerant landscaping. Need responsible fertilizing and pest control. That's where the Michigan State Extension and the Watershed Councils can do great jobs with this. Mulch appropriately. Here's one of my biggest pet peeves ever. Are landscaping contracts that basically say add more mulch every year. You have to mulch 2 to 3 inches. It's got to spread it out. It's got to be the landscape architects know exactly what I'm talking about. But maintenance contractors, they're going to do kind of whatever is in the plan. And if it says add mulch, they're going to add mulch because that's how they get paid, right? And so you'll see these giant mounds around trees, and literally all you're doing is killing the tree, right? You're literally causing root rot and killing the tree. So that's in there more for when I talk to engineers. So.
Drought tolerant. Do you have a list someplace?
I do. I do. Yeah. Where that's going to come up later, but I also have a good list. So it's kind of funny. I try to. Let me just blow through this, and lunch is at noon. I know lunch is supposed to be before. Yeah. We got a little long, so I'm just going to do 5 minutes.
You're doing pretty good.
So this is applying LID to municipal sites. It was a project we did with the Clean River Watershed Council through their Water Towns program. We worked with 3 communities, and what we did is we did LID site planning, mostly using BMPs. We developed preliminary site plans, and then we did preliminary hydrologic calculations and economic calculations just for site planning purposes. Okay. So this is just one of those cities. So Village of Clarkston. Okay, the Water Towns is kind of the Clean River Watershed Council. Tip of the Mitt probably has something similar, but basically this is connecting individual communities to their water resources. It's run by the local Watershed Council. It's the Clean River Watershed Council in partnership with these municipalities. Okay? It's a service that they provide for their membership, basically. All right, so we did conceptual site plans for green infrastructure. We did artistic renderings. We calculate volume reduction using the curve number method, and generalized cost estimates. And we did it for 3 different communities. I'm just going to show you one right now. So here's one of the things. This is one of the things the engineer came up with, is raindrops. So this is how much runoff is coming from the existing condition. If we make these changes, here's what you're going to keep out. So it's a 15% reduction. Okay. So giant purple means if you do this, 100% of the water that's currently flowing into the river no longer will. And these are all based on a 2-year, 24-hour storm event. So we're focusing on the water quality storm. Okay. So here's Clinton Township. Oh, they had so much turf grass, it was unbelievable. Their annual O&M budget was huge for mowing, huge. And I've got a couple of landscaping. You guys can probably crunch the numbers up here, but I had some landscaping companies down by me. They're making a business out of, give me your maintenance budget for 1 year, and I will convert this into something that's going to save you money, basically in perpetuity. So, tons of turf grass in this site. So here's our, this is their historic village. This is our, what we're proposing, but parking, fields, etc. A lot of turf grass. So what we went through is and then started identifying places. Well, some of it is about people. Green infrastructure and LID can also be about people. So we found, this is the library. This was an arboretum right here. There was no crosswalk here. Well, people were crossing there anyway. Right? They were just wearing down and packing in this soil, and then they were obviously mowing. So we said, well, let's connect these two. Let's create a formal pathway made out of permeable surfaces. Let's get a formal pathway out of this is called gravel pave, but a crushed stone surface so that it will suck up land, and let's plant some more trees again, right? And add that human element. They had turf grass around this, right? So what we did, this is a cistern or a planting box. And we're going to talk about more this afternoon, but we put in some cisterns, we put in some rain gardens, native prairies. The thing that's great about this is now they have this at their disposal. By the way, we nicknamed this parking lot the Angel. They never had a name for it. They didn't even realize it looked like an angel. We're sitting there going, well, it's just like an angel. And so now the angel has rain gardens on her wings. That's part of the human element to this. So we put this out there at a public forum meeting. Right? This got built less than 1 year later as an Eagle Scout project. So we just kind of floated out there, and somebody grabbed it and implemented it. Okay. Native prairie plants. This is their historical village. One of the things I told them was, you realize that they probably weren't mowing around the historical village. Right? If you really want historical accuracy, I bet you anything. And they said, you know what, you're probably right. So they converted some of their turf grass to native prairie plants. By the way, this is all artistic rendering. This is just landscape architects and designers selling a vision. So, naturalized growth, we kind of said, all right, you have choices. You can have trees and still mow the grass around it because you're going to get interception of evapotranspiration. You can have trees with mulch, or you can have trees with taller grass around it. We were just trying to share with them different possibilities. So this is an entryway that needs to be redone. So part of what we do is look for opportunity. And so we said, well, when it's time to redo this, why have a parking lot island that sheds water off, right? They actually have to water this all the time. Mm-hmm. So they are watering this, they're mowing this, all this water just sheds right off onto this asphalt, which then goes into their lake, and then the Clinton River downstream. So we basically said, this is at the end of its serviceable life. When you come in, we're going to depress this parking lot island, we're going to do a swale, we're going to put the stormwater pipe. Now you only have so one of the advantages of this, when I talk about life cycle, or I talk about the whole budget, traditional stormwater, curb, gutter, catch basins, 12-inch pipe, all of this. By doing this swale, now we're down to, instead of a 12-inch concrete pipe, a 6-inch HDPE pipe. So the cost savings is actually significant. Concrete savings, pipe savings, etc. Okay? Formalizing pond access. They said, well, So I know you can already, this was actually early in the summer, you're already starting to see a lot of algae and stuff kind of developing. Tremendous problem with geese and E. coli issues. Well, this pond is one of their community amenities. It's their focal point. And you come in this place in August, and that's the nastiest looking thing you've ever seen. It is so gross. But there's fish, and they want people to fish in it. So we kind of said, well, you know what? Doing this is going to cut down on the geese. It's going to cut down on the runoff, the fertilizer in the pond. They said, well, people still need to fish. Okay, let's formalize that. Let's formalize the fishing access. So, when it's time, green roofs. Okay, I don't suggest ripping out a new roof just to rip it out, but green roofs. We're going to talk about more this afternoon. Okay, and then here's our bioswale rain garden. So, doing a trench drain in here and putting it into another parking lot island, then that's your overflow structure. So right now, all the water goes into that. Now only excess water will go into that. Existing parking lot looks like crap. This is, again, you might say, I'm showing you a lot of structural BMPs here that we're going to talk about this afternoon. The reason I'm showing them is this was actually about planning. This was actually site planning and trying to be opportunistic and open people's eyes to different concepts. So this is their current parking lot. One of the things we told them is, look, even if you want asphalt, even if you just go back and put in the exact same parking lot, if you do one-way traffic and restripe it, I can take 15,000 square feet out of that parking lot, and you're going to lose 6 spots. Right? That got their attention. I'm like, I want you to use swales, I want you to use permeable pavement, but if nothing else, we can remove 15,000 feet of impervious surface just by restriping this thing, and you only lose 6 parking spots. That's huge. So sometimes it's about just movement and traffic flow patterns. And we did try to sell them on different porous pavement techniques. We'll talk about more of that this afternoon. Okay, this is that's a porous asphalt parking lot in Southfield. So what it looks like, you know, kind of to them. So again, I get bogged down a lot in porous pavement, and I'll cover that more this afternoon. But there's a lot of discussion about porous pavement. So swale improvements. So what we end up doing, this is the bottom line of all this, is I made a presentation to the city council, and I basically said, look, value added. This is value added. Okay? For $267,000, you can put in all these LID techniques instead of your traditional techniques, right? So when you redo your entryway, when you redo your parking lot, there's capital costs associated with putting those things in. Okay? So this is kind of the value added piece. $1 per gallon. They pay more than that in water at the store. So for $1 per gallon of stormwater treated, you can protect your lake streams and rivers for over 20 years. When you start putting it in that context, people will kind of sit up. Right? I'm like, okay, are each of you willing to pay $1 to protect your stormwater for the next 20 years? That's when people say, you know what? Because that number looks huge. That number looks reasonable when you start talking about in perpetuity. Okay? So it's about selling a vision, it's about site planning, it's about identifying opportunities, and it's about working with the community. It's not about, well, so as an example, this area here, at the top of the left arm of the angel, that's where they do their giant fairs and festivals. So that was hands off. That's got to be turf grass. All right, no problem. I won't touch that. Right? We'll just put rain gardens on this side of the angel. So I know I went a little bit long, so we still have 45 minutes for lunch.